Welcome back everybody to another in my aviation history series, and today we're going to be looking at a video of something with a little more complicated history than most people really understand, and that's that of the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command Pathfinder Force in World War II. Now I've noticed over the years as I talked about this, a lot of people kind of understand what the Pathfinders were, but didn't quite really understand what they did and how in-depth and complicated their mission really was. So in this video, we're going to take a quick look at the history behind the Pathfinder Force, why it was formed, as well as the techniques and technologies they used in order to ensure that they could get their mission done properly and that the Bomber Force was able to find their target. Now, before we get too far into this, as always, my name is Sean, and this is Sean's Aviation. Now, just before we do jump into this video, I do want to say thank you to everybody who is out there watching this channel. If you haven't yet, and you do like what you're watching, go down below, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. The liking and the subscribing will just help the YouTube algorithm push this video and this channel out to more people who might be interested in this kind of topic. And the notification bell will let you guys know when I release new videos. I usually do 4, sometimes 5 a month, depending on what I have. What I have in the pipeline. And how things are going outside of my YouTube life in my real life. If there's any of you out there who do want to help in a little bit more of a concrete way, using some money, donate some money, down below, link to my coffee account. I always have a coffee on the go, so you can hop over to that coffee account if you so choose and just buy me a coffee, help offset some of the costs with this channel. Every little bit does help, but please don't feel obligated. I'm not doing this to beg for money. I do what I do because I enjoy it, and I get to take you along for the ride while I do it. So please don't feel obligated. I'm not begging for money. Every little bit does help, though. Now, that all being said, let's jump into the history of the RAF Bomber Command Pathfinder Force. So the requirement for a Pathfinder Force came about for the Royal Air Force in early 1941. It was around this time that the Bomber Force, full force, moved from daylight bombing over to the night bombing, and they started to perfect their night bombing missions. Now, because of the switch to night bombing, then the formation of the aircraft changed. Gone were the large formations of self-defending bombers that we saw later with the 8th Air Force with the United States Army Air Force, and the RAF adopted the bomber stream formation. Now, this was a formation of individual bombers flying to the targets and finding their own targets versus the 8th Air Force with a large formation where one bomber found the target and the rest just bombed on command. So while crews reported decent results, many observers on the ground, as well as German radio broadcasts, told a different story. This culminated in the Butt Report in August of 1941 that showed that only 10% of bombers were getting to within 5 miles of the target, and only 1% of bombs were actually in the target vicinity. This was an abysmal record, and something needed to be done. At around the same time, a report was circulating through the upper echelons of the RAF, written by Frederick Lindman, one of the government's leading scientific advisors, that the most effective use of the bomber force was to destroy the workers' homes, not the factories that they worked in. Bomber Command, under Air Vice Marshal Arthur Harris, adopted this recommendation and began to plan for operations in early 1942 with the aim to destroy housing. Now, flying at night and trying to identify a target is very difficult, and the RAF had started, in early 1940, with the switch to night bombing, to design and build advanced radio navigation aids, namely G, but these units were complicated to build, and only a small number were ready to be used by 1942. Around 300, give or take. Now, G worked, basically, by sending out time-stamped radio pulses from 2 different locations that were a known distance apart in England. Now, when one times how long each signal took to reach the aircraft, one can plot the distances on a map and triangulate where the aircraft is located to a high degree of accuracy. Now, this is great for finding your way over occupied Europe at night, but with only 300 units available, it would be hard to get every plane to the target. This is when the idea of a Pathfinder force became more popular, to some. The idea was that a selected group of highly experienced crews would lead the bomber force with these G units, find the target, and mark it for the bomber stream to then drop their bombs on. Surprisingly, Harris was against this setup, as he was afraid it would cause rivalry and envy between the units, and many of the group commanders agreed. However, the Air Ministry thought otherwise, overrode Harris's objections, and the Pathfinder force was formed, initially with one squadron from each of the 5 existing bomber groups. Now, the initial units of the Pathfinder force were 156 Squadron from one group with Wellingtons, 109 Squadron from 2 group with Wellingtons and Mosquitoes, 7 Squadron from 3 group with Sterlings, 35 Squadron from 4 group with Halifaxes, and 83 Squadron from 5 group with Lancasters. So the first few missions flown by the Pathfinder force were not much better than the previous missions, however, and the target misidentification, as well as bombers dropping their loads off target, created a poor record. Over the next few missions, the Pathfinder force honed their techniques, and targets were being hit with greater and greater concentration of bombs, as well as with higher precision. So as the Pathfinder force and the bomber stream in general became more efficient, other problems arose. One of the issues to crop up was one that was actually not predicted at all, and that was bomber creepback, which I'll explain here with a bit of a graphic. So here we have a city that is the target for tonight's raid. As the target is consumed by larger and larger fires, the following bombers would drop their bombs on the leading edge of the fire to limit their time over the target, causing the fires to grow larger, and the following bombers to drop on the leading edge of that fire. Now, this meant that as the attack went on, bombers were dropping farther and farther away from the intended aiming point. Now, to counter this, new techniques for the Pathfinder force were devised. First, the force was split into 3 groups. One would lead the way with G and drop white identification flares to mark the route to the target for the rest of the Pathfinder force. Then a second group would identify the target location and mark it with colored target flares, to be followed up with the third group carrying incendiaries to start fires on the main target, allowing the rest of the bomber stream to identify the target by these fires. So the first mission to use these techniques took place on the night of September 4th, 5th, 1942, and it was a complete success. And this was the mission profile flown, for the most part, for the rest of the war. Now, it should be noted that the basics of what the Pathfinder force does had already been used by the Germans during the London Blitz in 1940. This meant that it did not take long for the German command to figure out what the RAF was doing, and they started to light decoy flares to draw the bomber stream away from the main target. So on the night of October 15th and 16th, during a mission to Cologne, these decoy flares drew most of the force away, and of the 70,000 bombs dropped that night, only 214 landed on target. Now, clearly, the Pathfinder force would need to modify their plans to get around this. So as the Pathfinder force found their feet and began to hone their techniques, the tempo of operations was also picking up, and the need for more Pathfinder crews and units became greater. In January of 1943, the Pathfinder force was spun off to form No. 8 Group, and on April 2nd, more units were transferred over to bolster their ranks, with No. 405 Squadron with Halifaxes and No. 97 Squadron with Lancasters. Then in June, again, 2 more units were added, 105 and 139 Squadrons, both flying Mosquitoes. This now brought the Pathfinder force up to a full set of 9 squadrons. These units also received some new equipment, the most important being oboe. Now, this was a system that triangulated the aircraft positions similar to G. However, the signals were bounced back to an operator in England, who then deciphered the position of the aircraft and then sent signals back to the pilots of the aircraft to enable them to steer onto a proper course if they were off. So this reduced the workload for the crews who were flying the aircraft, and it reduced the chances that the system details falling into the hands of the Germans, as all the actual complicated equipment that deciphered the radio signals was based in England. That being said, the radio signals were easily picked up, and Germans had used a similar system on the Eastern Front, so at the end of the day, nothing was really a secret. Another technological advancement that started to appear on Pathfinder Force aircraft around this time, in January of 1943, was H2S. Now, this was a ground scanning radar that allowed crews to perform blind bombing through cloud or haze. Now, the system was pretty basic compared to what we have, used to seeing today, but a well-trained operator would be able to pick out coastlines, rivers, and built-up urban areas, and when combined with oboe navigation, would allow for somewhat pinpoint ability to mark the target area. The success of this system led to the decision in February to install it on all bomber aircraft, not just those of the Pathfinder force. But it was also be able to use as a navigation aid when flying above clouds for the individual bombers in the stream. So when used by the Pathfinder force, the H-2S would allow the operator to identify the target area, then parachute flares would be used to mark the target for the bomber stream, who would aim on the flare when they drop their bombs, with never actually seeing the ground. Now, some of you may see the problem here. The parachute flare would eventually fall below the cloud layer, and any wind would slowly blow it off target, negating the accuracy these systems were supposed to impart. So this led to the next big tactic change in Pathfinder Force, the Master Bomber. And this also helped counter the problem we saw earlier with the creep back of the aiming point. Now, the Master Bomber was a highly experienced crew who had more or less circled the target and direct crews on where to aim. For example, if the target flare started to be blown off course, the Master Bomber could instruct the stream to start bombing to the left or right, short or long of the flare to keep the bombs closer to target. Another issue that arose was that the exploding bombs had a habit of actually blowing out the marker flare, making the whole exercise a wasted effort. So this was overcome by dropping the target flares to one side of the target, say 1,000 yards, then providing a false wind value to the program to be programmed into the incoming bomber's bomb site, so that when the bombs were dropped on the flare, they would in reality be hitting about 1,000 yards to the side, right on the intended target. Now as well, there'd be numerous Pathfinder aircraft in the bomber stream who could remark the target as needed if the flares burned out, blew off course, or if the Germans began lighting decoy flares. So all of these techniques together ensured that by the middle of 1943, that the average RAF bomber stream was getting the vast majority of their bombs near the intended target. So around this time, some of the Pathfinder squadrons actually began using more and more of the Mosquitoes and used a technique where they would dive down to low altitude to drop their target flares in order to ensure that they were placed as accurately as possible. Now, as the war progressed, some of the Master Bomber pilots actually began flying the Mosquitoes down lower under the cloud layer to get a better look at the target and ensure that any corrections made would correct close to the target as possible. There were even some cases of Master Bombers flying in P-51s at low altitude, ensuring that the bomber stream was bombing as accurately as possible on the intended target. So as you can see, the techniques used by the RAF to successfully bomb Germany night after night after night evolved as the war went on. By the end of the war, into 1944, 1945, the RAF had it down to a fine art and could easily find and bomb out the centers of some of these German cities. Now with the RAF doing that at night and the 8th Air Force bombing the infrastructure, the railroads, the factories, all that kind of stuff during the day, Germany had really no way of coming back. From about late 1943 into early 1944, there was just no way that Germany could stop this rolling wave of bombers across their territory, and it was pretty much a matter of time until their entire economic system collapsed, and we saw that with the end of the war. So just as an aside, this isn't any type of video, debating the pros and cons or the philosophical rights or wrongs of the World War II bombing campaign. That's a video for another person and another time. This was just the nuts and bolts of how the RAF Pathfinder force worked, and please don't take this as any type of tacit implication that I agree with or believe in that. Again, I'm not going to get into any of that. It was what it was, it happened, it's history, and that is what we are talking about, is the history of what happened. Right or wrong, it happened. So please, I don't want to get into this in the comment section, so please don't try to turn this into some sort of philosophical debate. That's not what this video is about. But on that being said, thank you everybody for watching, and we will see everybody next time.
Thank you for watching, guys, and as always, if you are interested in any of the content you see, you can access my website at www.seans-aviation.com. You can see all the latest pictures of aircraft and museums and the build logs of all of my current models and past models on that site. And if you're interested in any of this content, please click the subscribe button here on YouTube to follow more. Thank you very much, and see you guys next time.